Hello and welcome to Cambridge Skeptics Live on this ridiculously hot day. I hope you're all surviving out there. I think it's 37 degrees at the moment and I, for one, am melting. I want to say a very special thank you to all the new subscribers we got since the last video. So I think most of you are in India, so hello over there.
It's probably quite hot over there as well.
Yes, it's probably quite hot over there. You're probably going for 37 degrees, which is ridiculous. It's a cool day. Yes, and before I kick off this evening and introduce Rosie, I just want to give people a heads up of things coming up in the next couple of weeks. So we're planning on taking a break after the 16th of August until the end of September. That's mainly due to people being on holiday and having babies and things like that. So
sorry about that.
Yeah, sorry about that, Chris. Yeah. And so, we will be taking a break for about a month or so, and we will be back at the end of September. But anyway, all of that housekeeping out of the way, I'd like to introduce Rosie Campbell, who is going to be talking to us this evening about how we go about making sure Skynet doesn't actually take over at some point in the future. So I will hand over to you, Rosie.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I am based in Oakland in California, and I can tell you it is a balmy 16 degrees. So sorry, guys. But yeah, I am here to talk about AI and specifically a focus on safe and responsible AI. I've had a bit of a winding road to get to where I am now, but I started off working at the BBC in the UK in the R&D department there as a research engineer doing a whole range of different projects. And one of the projects I worked on involved trying to automate the process of being like a camera operator or a director. So how you might frame shots automatically, how you might cut between different shots automatically. And so that spurred a bit of an interest in machine learning for me. And around the same time, I encountered a way of thinking called effective altruism, which is all about using reason and evidence to try and maximize the amount of good you can do. And one of the big focus areas in effective altruism is the concept of AI safety and existential risks. So thinking about these sort of low probability but high impact events that could cause real problems for society and trying to invest some resources into addressing those. So the combination of my machine learning interest and then my interest in effective altruism led me to focus a bit more on AI safety. I ended up moving over to California to work at UC Berkeley as the assistant director of the Center for Human Compatible AI at UC Berkeley for a bit. I then worked at the Partnership on AI, which is a nonprofit that focuses on responsible AI. And I was doing some work around responsible publication norms for the field. So how you balance the need to be open with publications, enable reproducibility and openness and knowledge sharing, while also trying to think about how you might minimize the risks of potentially dual use or dangerous technology. And then about a year ago, I moved over to OpenAI, which is a lab that focuses on partially AI research, so developing capabilities in AI, large language models, DALL-E, the image generation tool, that kind of thing, and then also building products out of them to try and allow more people in the world to get their hands on these tools and use them. And that's actually very helpful for us because it helps us learn about the use cases and the risks of this technology. It's all very well saying to ourselves, like, oh, we're going to build safe AI, but if we have no idea how that works in the real world, what people are going to try and do with it, what the challenges are, where it fails, then that's going to be a very difficult challenge. So my role at OpenAI is on the trust and safety team. And one of the things I do is oversee our app review process. And what that involves is people who want to use our API to build products will apply to get approval from us for that. And we basically assess those applications for potential risks, potential safety issues, make sure they're aligned with our policies. And we'll work with customers and developers to try and make sure that they have built-in safeguards, and we've kind of all got on board with doing this in a responsible way. So that's my main focus. As I said, very interested in AI and AI safety in particular, and very happy to be here and talk to you guys.
Okay. So, do you want? We'll let you take the floor and tell us about these things.
Yeah, so I think there are sort of a way to view this that I like to think about, which is on a spectrum. So there are some people who are very focused on near-term risks of AI. So the kinds of things we're already seeing with current systems, like bias and discrimination in the ways like machine learning system is used in products today. But then there's also these sort of further out risks. So you might have some midterm risks around like technological unemployment and how that's going to affect society. Things like wide-scale disinformation, if you think about deep fakes, that kind of thing, things that could be quite destabilizing. And then in the longer term, you have these more sort of like existential risks where you might build this super powerful, capable, intelligent system that is no longer under our control, or it might be under the control of an adversarial human force, whatever that might be.
And that's where we get Battlestar Galactica and the Cylons.
Exactly, right? And Skynet and all of that kind of thing. And so a lot of these things do seem a bit sci-fi, but there are some threads that you can kind of already see coming through. So if you think about like the way that systems in social media today optimize for engagement, they've taken this single metric and they really optimize for engagement, and that's had all these like unexpected consequences and social effects.
So in like a Black Mirror kind of way, if you just went, yeah, hey, you have full reign over the company's resources, it will build a bunch of robots that like grab people and just force them to stare at screens for 24 hours a day, because that is 100% engagement.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the issue with choosing a single metric and optimizing ruthlessly for that metric. And that's what computers are very, very good at. Like with humans, we have all these background assumptions. Like if someone says, I want to like get rid of cancer, they know that the way to do that is not by killing all the humans. Like technically that might work, but that's not what we mean. And AI systems don't necessarily have all of those assumptions built in. They don't have our value system. They evolved in a very different way. And so we have this is what's known as the alignment problem. Trying to get these systems to actually be aligned with our values and even just aligned with like a simple task that we give it without making all of these decisions that we wouldn't endorse. That's actually a very complicated task and has a lot of sort of both conceptual difficulties and like technical implementation difficulties as well.
So with that sort of thing in mind, the question that immediately springs to my mind is the sort of 3 laws of robotics type approach. Is it better to give AI rules that it follows so it doesn't cause harm, or is it better to make it so that it couldn't cause harm in the first place? So
so the rules of Asimov's laws are like, all the books are about how they go wrong, right? So we already know that this is a system that works. And I think that's one of the challenges is it's very, very hard to specify all the things you don't want the system to do. So if you give it a simple task, like go and get me a coffee or something, things like not changing the color of the sky is something we wouldn't want it to do, but we don't think to say that because that seems like completely irrelevant and outside the scope. And so it's very, very difficult for us to think about in advance all of the possible things we should specify to keep it within bounds. So there's a lot of research that's going on to try and think about how we can, rather than like doing this like explicit programming and rules kind of thing, how can we get the system to actually like learn our values either from observing us or through us teaching it. A lot of these systems are like large language models, which is what OpenAI tends to work mostly with. It's trained on data from the internet, so it's absorbing all this cultural knowledge and like human data essentially. And it's kind of interesting because you find if you talk to the system and you tell it that it knows it's an AI, and you talk to it and you ask it questions, it answers as if it's like a depiction of AI from sci-fi, because that's what it's trained on, that's what it's learned. And so, we were joking that like one possible solution to the alignment problem might be just to write loads of like sci-fi where AI turns out to be like really good and helpful and safe, and then it will just like learn that that's how it's supposed to be. But sadly, I don't think it's going to be quite as straightforward as that.
I've been on the internet. Are you sure that's the best way to learn?
like I remember stories from a while ago of like, oh, they created a Twitter bot and had it learn how to do things, and within 13 minutes it was shouting racist slurs.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, exactly.
the internet's not the best place to grow up.
Yeah, this is a large part of my job, is trying to think like, okay, this thing sounds innocuous, but what are the terrible ways it could possibly go wrong? Like, how could people misuse this? How could it accidentally go wrong? Like, what's the worst thing that could happen with it? And then try and come up with bounds to avoid that happening. And so, yeah, I think the Twitter bot thing is a great example, because it seemed like a piece of harmless fun, but then, you know, people will always try and push the boundaries and experiment and see if they can get it to do bad things. And you know, sometimes it's nefarious, sometimes it's just people wanting to experiment, but you know, this is all things we want to anticipate and be able to put guardrails around so that it doesn't actually cause real world harm.
So, I mean, you said about sort of teaching it our morals. Now, obviously, that is there isn't an our morals. There's people all have different things. So it makes me worry about things like, you know, say you have a group of white supremacists who develop an AI to be that can help them maximize putting their message out. It's, you know, obviously at the end of the day, the people using it are the people who are going to potentially use it badly.
Yeah.
But is there a way to sort of combat that problem? You know, to stop people being able to use AI in a bad way?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because we talk about AI alignment and we say, oh yeah, we want it to be aligned with human values, but like, does that mean the values of OpenAI or the company that's building this technology? Does it mean values overall? Does it mean an individual? And if I as a user of an AI system, if I ask it to do something illegal, for example, you know, if it does that thing, it's aligned with me, but it's not aligned with society. So how you build something that is both like useful to individuals while also sort of taking into account the collective value system is really difficult. And I think to your question specifically about, you know, a group of white supremacists, for example, one current advantage to AI, well, depending on how you see it, is it's quite hard to build something that is very, very powerful unless you have a lot of resources and technical knowledge and just money to invest in computation, that kind of thing. So it's less likely that a random group of people are going to be able to do something like this, but obviously, you know, a well-resourced organization, and a nation state, for example, these are all organizations that could potentially be building something very capable. And if your value systems aren't aligned, then obviously that's going to cause problems. Yeah, I think we don't have a good way to resolve this at the moment. And one of the core tensions that I wrestle with in my job is the balance between like democracy and paternalism, almost. Like, to what extent should OpenAI be you know, really like committed to free speech no matter what, just like people should be able to do what they want with it, and to what extent should we be imposing some kind of like level of expectation in terms of the kind of content that we is appropriate for the system. And then, yeah, as the systems get more advanced, like, should we be embedding these with like liberal democracy values, or should we be trying to like consider other cultural values? It's a really tough question that we have not yet figured out.
What are the societal metrics that we want AI to optimize for?
Yes, exactly. And that's a question of values in itself. And you know, the one potential upside is, as these systems get more capable, we might actually be able to use them to help us figure these things out. Like, obviously, moral philosophy is a problem that we've not solved for millennia, but hopefully we've all been...
I watched all of The Good Place.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I think, like, even though a lot of the questions of moral philosophy remain unsolved, we have overall as a society we've made progress. We've kind of somehow figured out how to cooperate and get on and tolerate each other. And maybe with more advanced tools and more intelligent systems, we can make even more progress. So there's some reason to be optimistic, but it's certainly a hard problem.
How serious are the other companies involved in the development of AI taking these issues?
It's very mixed. There are certainly a handful of companies that are very like aware of these issues and taking them quite seriously. We recently released a joint statement with a couple of other labs around like the responsible use of large language models like this, which was, you know, an effort to sort of bring some industry like standards to make things a bit more safe and responsible. But I don't think that's the case across the board. There's still a lot of organizations who are really focused on developing capabilities of these systems without necessarily thinking about the consequences. I think, you know, more and more people are aware that tech policy is a real issue. You know, people have seen what happens when you know, social media, for example, goes ahead without considering some of these things more carefully, and so people are starting to see how that affects their lives and taking it a bit more seriously as an issue. But I think AI is still somewhat of a unknown thing for a lot of policymakers and a lot of the general public.
How far behind is regulation in this field?
Oh man. Yeah, I'm not.
Most of them can't. One of my favorite clips in terms of demonstrating, because I work in data as well, one of my favorite clips in terms of demonstrating why policy is so far behind is the I can't remember if it's House or Senate hearing on like AI and big tech, and you have one of them standing up and he takes out his iPhone and he goes to the head of Google and goes, okay, so can you track me with this phone?
Yeah.
And do you know what's going on this phone? Well, no. It's an iPhone. Okay, but Google is on here. Like, well, you can go to Google on here. Yeah, but so you can track me through this phone. Well, only if you opt into certain services, and I don't know exactly what Apple does. Okay, but they just fundamentally don't understand. They're two different companies. They have two different setups.
Making the regulations don't understand.
And
also
they understand.
So quickly.
Their understanding is like rooted in the 90s.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's hyperbolic. Rosie, you'll know better than I.
No, yeah, I mean, I think that's right. To be honest, like AI is such a complex field. You know, I work in it as my day job, and I still don't understand most of it. Like, it's very confusing, and like how, like it's a lot to ask to expect policymakers to have to get up to speed on these things. But I do think that like having more people who are able to bridge that gap and like translate the technical stuff in a way that is understandable to non-technical people is going to be super important because it is just such a complex topic, and I think regulation is very far behind. One way that I see the AI industry is like, or at least like, I think some people are trying to approach this sort of similar to the aviation industry, where it's in each individual company's interest to like cut corners and be you know, just like move as fast as possible without considering safety, but it actually reflects badly on the whole industry if there's a plane crash or something, like people just stop flying, they don't just switch to a different provider. So there's sort of like this collective incentive to have a safe industry, and that's what I'm trying to push for more in the AI world as well. It's like it might not be in any individual's company's interest to spend a lot and focus a lot on building these safety mechanisms, but actually overall it's better for us as an industry if we have those in place. So the more we can do this kind of collective like norm setting, standard setting as an industry, I think we'll be in a better position.
What's the like a lot of the examples that you've been giving seem like they're on the kind of cutting edge of what AI is doing, like around kind of things that are designed to represent very complex human intelligence. How much of your world focuses on that versus focuses on like maybe more fundamental types of automation that have been around for like 20 years? Are there ethical problems? Like where in the sort of spectrum of complexity around AI, where do you think the ethical problems sit today?
That's a good question. I mean, I think there are some problems with technology that have always existed. You know, the risk of technological unemployment has been happening, you know, ever since Industrial Revolution, basically. And I think that we've sort of muddled through that, but I do think it's going to get increasingly problematic as we have these systems that can take more and more of the jobs that humans tend to do. But I think like my personal work on a daily basis, I'm dealing with people who want to build stuff with the technology we have today. So that's like the language models and stuff like DALL-E, image generation. So just as some examples of things we might deal with, GPT-3 is like a system where you can give it some text, and then it will like write something in the style of that text. So you can ask it to write an essay in the style of a president or a 5-year-old or something like that. And people build all sorts of products using this.
Sometimes those two things aren't necessarily distinguishable.
Yes. Yeah, and people use it to build all sorts of things, from like copywriting assistants, essay writing assistants, to stuff like mental health chatbots. And that's a really tricky case for us, because something like a mental health chatbot has potentially a lot of social benefits and positives, and you know, there's a lot of upsides to that if it works and it's done well. But at the same time, it's a high stakes area. If the system makes a mistake, if it says the wrong thing, if it's inaccurate in some way, that could be really, really bad, and someone could get seriously harmed. And at the moment, that's one of the areas that we're very cautious about, and we tend to restrict, because we don't have the guarantees that we want to feel comfortable that our system knows enough about like evidence-based mental health treatment to be able to engage in a responsible way. So yeah, a lot of the challenges that I find the most difficult are these ones where I can see the social benefit of the thing if it worked effectively, but we just don't feel necessarily confident at this point that that's going to do a good job of that. Another example is like tools for political education, like a chatbot that mimics a politician, and you can sort of talk to it and find out what it believes, what its policies are, that kind of thing. Again, we wouldn't approve something like that at the moment, because if it's incorrect, if it gave the wrong answers, that could sway how someone votes, and then you could like end up massively influencing an election. Even though I can also see how that would be like a really cool thing, and maybe socially beneficial if it works well.
So we've got a couple of questions from the chat. I'm going to sort of put them together in sort of one. So someone's mentioned about the story that was going around about the Google AI being sentient.
Yeah.
But I think related to that is the idea that will AI ever have what we would consider empathy?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was a really interesting story. And I think there was like a lot of people thinking it was like obvious on one side or the other. And I don't think that was, I think that like it was very, if anything, it was like a very complicated situation. Like, I don't think it's, I don't think that system was sentient, but I also don't think it's crazy for us to be like considering that as an option. And I think like as these systems get more capable, that's going to be something we have to wrestle with, if only because I currently don't really see a reason why what we think of as intelligence or sentience should run on carbon but not on silicon. Like, why would that be the case? I don't know. Maybe someone has a good answer to that, but it doesn't seem obvious to me. And I think people tend to conflate a few things when they're thinking about this issue. So there's sort of intelligence, or another way of thinking about that might be like ability to complete tasks effectively. There's sentience or consciousness, which is this idea of like, you know, having a sense of your own self and you know, like a theory of mind, I guess, something like that. And then there's like moral patienthood. Like, should we consider that a moral entity that we should worry about the welfare of? And I think there are three different things. I could imagine a sentient system that actually didn't feel pain, didn't suffer, and we didn't really need to worry about turning it off or on. It's you know, might not have moral patienthood even if it's sentient. And similarly, you could have a really capable system that's very risky and dangerous to us as a society, but doesn't have any actual sentience or consciousness behind it. And I think people tend to get hung up on those things a bit too much. Like, one of the arguments I often hear from people when they're sort of dismissing AI risk is that they don't believe these systems could ever be sentient. And I think that's just like a whole separate question. I think like you can still
it doesn't need to have a consciousness in order to be harmful.
Exactly.
And there's no, at least from my understanding, there's no particular need to develop an AI with like an inner consciousness, like a sense of self and a sense of identity.
Yeah.
Because the whole nature is that it's I don't know, deterministic. Like, you put inputs in, you get an output out. you let it run on its own, and it can communicate with people depending on what it is. Draw pictures.
Well, it's a bit like how robots don't need to be humanoid in order to carry out a lot of automated physical tasks either. But a lot of our early conception of what robotics would do for automation involves humanoid things, because that was the closest analogy that we had. And it turns out actually that's really complicated, a whole bunch of uncanny valley problems. So let's just figure out the thing that's needed.
Plus, in the 50s, it was easy to put someone in a silver guitar.
That's true.
So,
I think,
go ahead.
Sorry,
you go ahead.
Analogy, the sort of robots not needing to be humanoid, and similarly, we might create minds that aren't like human minds, but they are their own form of mind somehow, and figuring out how we deal with that, and whether or not we do need to worry about the welfare of these systems or not is going to be super interesting and challenging. But yeah, I wish people would not think that something has to be conscious in order for it to be dangerous. It can still be dangerous.
I'm now thinking of Marvin the paranoid android.
Yes.
So we've got a couple of more questions. Sheldon's asked a question related to the policy things we were talking about earlier. And he wants to know whether you think it's the reason that policymakers are having trouble understanding the topic is we haven't really developed the right language to get across the ideas yet.
Yeah, that's interesting. I certainly think there's a lot of jargon and a lot of terms that kind of get overloaded, like sentience, consciousness, intelligence, all of these things that aren't clear, and probably do give a misleading impression of what we're talking about and what we're worried about to policymakers. So I certainly think that trying to develop the right language and getting crisper about what we mean can be helpful. I mean, even the term artificial intelligence itself, people have very different understandings of what that means. The way I think of it is machine learning is like a particular method that we're using to get to artificial intelligence, but artificial intelligence is a sort of outcome or the effects that we're aiming towards, but you could get there through different means. So in the past there was a term called good old-fashioned AI, which was much more of a rule-based system, like we mentioned earlier, and so that was still trying to achieve artificial intelligence, but it wasn't doing that using machine learning. It was using a different approach. But I think even that word itself is people don't have a clear conception of what it means, and the goalposts keep moving, right? There's some famous quote that's like AI is whatever computers can't do yet, or something. Like Google Maps may have been considered AI at one point. Now it just feels completely normal to us. So yeah, I think the sort of fuzziness around the terms that we're using definitely contributes to it being difficult to make effective policies here.
I wonder if there's also the problem with the kind of hype around the term AI. It is possible to design an artificial intelligence system that is extremely basic. Like the example that I would use is I can develop a system that recommends whether or not I should wear a jacket today based on temperature outside.
Yeah.
And it can do that without any machine learning. I can simply pre-program it with an intelligent rule that says, hey, you're in Britain, you probably need a jacket. Or it could say, not today. Or it could say, it looks at if there's a thermometer that it's synced up to and it reads the temperature and it says, listen, if it's below 18 degrees, take a jacket. The difference there with machine learning is that I wouldn't need to pre-program it to say 18 degrees. It could say gather a bunch of thermometer and clothing choice data from somewhere else and learn that actually the optimal point is 17 degrees or 20 if it's raining, something like that. So I guess I wonder, for me, I'm interested in kind of this big, but the media talks a lot about all of these sort of leading edge AI systems that can or could be developed, but we interact with artificial intelligence in what we would consider very dumb devices all the time.
Yeah, totally. I think that's completely right. And again, is this thing of if it feels like a mundane thing, it's no longer thought of as AI, but it still should be really. It's the same.
And there's room for ethical problems in that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
In all of these other sort of automated decisions that we have let intelligent systems, no matter how they're devised, come up with for us.
Yes. And there's all sorts of subtle ways that can go wrong. I think this is one of the challenges specifically with machine learning and neural networks is that it's very hard to interrogate the system and figure out why a certain decision was made and what how it came to a certain conclusion. So this comes up a lot in things like using AI or algorithmic assessments for judging like credit scores, or like whether someone should get a loan or get a job or something like that. It might be making good predictions, but it's using all sorts of like obscure like inferences and like that you don't quite know which data is influencing it in one way or another, and it might be just using proxies to things that you actually care about, and that can result in a lot of like in any individual case, it's not obvious that something's going wrong, but on aggregate, you might start to see trends that show that the system is biased in some systematic way, but you can't interrogate and then fix the problem because they are these kind of black box systems where you put inputs in and you get outputs. Unlike something like a rule-based system where you can clearly see exactly what rules it has. So that's pretty difficult as well.
And so in my work, I run a team that sets insurance prices. Insurance pricing in the UK market is incredibly sophisticated, and it has lots of layers of behaviours that it's trying to sort of simulate in order to produce a final price. And so why we end up with a given price isn't immediately clear from the inputs or even from like the components, whether someone's going to cancel or not or so on. Like any one component in isolation can't explain the price. You have to look at it holistically. And one of the things that is clear is that you quite often get correlations or actions that we've taken that will result in odd behaviors from the models unless we take it into account. And so a sort of a maybe more universal example that springs to mind is that I know there's been rulings algorithms, is that the way? Sentencing algorithms, that's the word. Sorry, sentencing algorithms.
Okay, yeah. Criminal
quite
justice.
often, like historically sort of difficult neighbourhoods then end up getting incorporated into the algorithm, going, oh, well, they're highly likely to commit crimes again, so they need to be locked up for a long period of time. And actually, that ends up perpetuating racism or classism or stereotypes of some sort, because it just goes, well, actually, you're just from a bad area.
Yeah, and this is the problem.
Made it bad.
This is the problem of using like aggregate statistics to make decisions about individuals, and like you can see why that's useful in certain circumstances, but you really ideally want a chance for people to appeal, and that's very difficult when you don't know why a certain decision has been made, and you end up learning these proxies that are not actually related to the thing you care about, and then that ends up sort of reinforcing the biases. And I think people talk a lot about bias in machine learning, and again, I think this is one of those terms that gets used in many different ways. Some people get angry when they'll call a system biased because the data used to train the system doesn't accurately represent the real world. It's sampled, there's selection bias, it's sampled badly in some way. So the system doesn't represent the real world, and therefore the system's biased. Another way people use it is to say, well, the system does represent the real world, but the real world is biased. So you've taken biased, you've like accurately sampled the world, but the world is racist, it's whatever else, and that has now embedded itself in the system. And so they are two opposite problems, but both biased in a certain way and need different solutions. And you need to think about like what is the end goal that you're trying to get to? Are you trying to accurately represent the real world, or are you trying to create a more sort of idealized version that we want to aim for?
Is there a prescriptive? Sorry, is there a prescriptive element? So I'm wondering that's how to phrase this.
I think I know what you mean.
In the case of the sentencing algorithm, that area might be more likely to have higher rates of recidivism. That might be perfectly reasonable, but the outcome that we end up with is one that actually we're unhappy with, because you end up with, say, black people in an equivalent situation to a white person ending up with a higher sentence.
Yeah.
But not because they are black directly, but because of other factors that may or may not have been related. Like it's
a question of where does free will come in.
Yeah, is it
we end up with the Minority Report type situation? Like, if a predictive algorithm is perfect, then there is no free will. And the Minority Report being kind of the sci-fi version of this, and I in a less high stakes context, like let's say in like a recommendation algorithm when you're shopping, companies are actually we don't want to get the recommendation perfect, because we want to encourage people to buy more than one thing, say, or to buy something else after, later. And so we talk a lot about like perturbing the results, or like increasing recall, and not just aiming for precision in the results. So I guess like where does free will and predictive algorithms come in?
Man, that is a big question. I think, well, you work in recommendations, right? So you're probably familiar with this whole thing of like trying to build in serendipity to systems.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Yeah, you don't want to, if you're watching Netflix, you don't want it to only show you stuff that it knows you will definitely like, because then you'll never discover anything new that you didn't realize you would like. And yeah, I think that there's going to be some sort of like balance that you want to aim for to get the sort of right mix of helpful recommendations that are based on what you like, but also throwing in this serendipity.
But then, like, is there room for serendipity in sentencing algorithms, or in like medical decision like AIs?
That feels different to me. I feel like the problem with the sentencing decisions is not the free will aspect, but it's the fact that like for any individual, the system might be wrong, and it then is perpetuating it's like amplifying the biases, because that data will then go back into the system. So I if I could make a perfect algorithm that would always correctly predict the right sentence for every individual, that seems like an improvement on the status quo to me. I don't think that the serendipity aspect is needed there, but I do think from a like wanting to not sort of make everyone a filter bubble of their own preferences, then it becomes quite important.
Got a couple more questions from the chat. I'm going to merge a couple together because I think they're kind of related. So the general question is, when we talk about AI, is that really a thing, or is that some kind of like pseudo-scientific idea that's out there because of science fiction, and we're actually talking about elaborate algorithms instead? Does that make sense as a question? So
yeah, I mean, again, I think it comes down to the definition. I think that there are versions of the concept of AI that are like more sci-fi than they are realistic. But I think the general idea of systems that can become very, very capable at achieving tasks, regardless of their intelligence or consciousness or sentience, they're very, very competent, and if we gave it a task, it would like be able to gather up all the right resources to do that, and it would like be able to strategize and all of these things. So some of it, if you take those to the extreme, they do end up sounding quite sci-fi. But I think that if you try and actually pull it apart and break it down, none of those things are actually completely implausible. So it is worth thinking about. And it gets down to semantics, like what was the phrase that they use, like advanced algorithms or something? You could call it that if you like. I don't mind, as long as we're talking about the same underlying concepts. The words don't really matter to me as much.
I really like this question, where I've lost it now. Should we be making AI that behaves like humans?
So if you're worried about, there's a lot of reasons why you might not want to do that. Like giving it depends what you mean by behaves like humans, but like if you're talking about like giving it consciousness, giving it agency, there's a lot of people who would argue strongly like that's a terrible idea, and we should be very focused on just creating narrow systems that can achieve a certain task well, that aren't like generally intelligent in the ways that humans are. I think there might be some cases where if you did decide to go down that route, you would it would come at a cost to some capabilities. So for example, if you wanted to build an AI that could take care of your elderly relative, having it behave in a human-like way and be very caring and be able to provide like friendship and support is probably going to be a necessary part. So how you entangle those two things, like there just might be some use cases where behaving like a human is kind of essential to achieving that thing. But it also might be the case that we are, as a society, willing to be like, cool, we're happy to accept the cost that we're never going to have something like that, in order to ensure that we kind of stay on stay on a certain side of safety, and I'm not sure what the right trade-off is there yet.
Okay, so related to that question of safety, we've got a follow-up question from the same guy or girl. Sorry, I don't actually know. On the topic of self-driving cars, do we focus on saving the life of the driver in an accident, or potentially the people the car hits?
Yeah, I think you need to think about the second and third order effects of these things, and the author Cory Doctorow has written a lot about this, and I would recommend reading some of his work on it. But the idea that you might say, okay, well, it should prioritize the life of children or the greater number of people or something like that. So if I'm in a self-driving car and it's about to hit a group of kids, it should kill me instead. However, if you think about a system where that's in cars, probably the drivers of the cars aren't going to accept it, and they're going to try and modify it. They're going to complain. They're going to do things. And if the whole system is reliant on all these automated vehicles kind of communicating and being predictable, if you're messing with those systems, suddenly that all falls apart, and the whole system overall is going to be more dangerous. So I think you kind of have to think about what incentives these rules create, and then what the second and third order effects would be, and then try and design the system as a whole to be safe rather than each individual instance.
So there's a highly amusing sketch comedy, radio comedy, which I'm going to drop into the chat, with John Fenimore, who's a British comedian. And basically the premise of the sketch is, well, naturally the car itself just takes a utilitarian decision of, okay, how many humans versus how many humans.
Mm-hmm.
But for an extra add-on, we can increase the value of the life inside the car. So actually, rather than it being 1-to-1, actually needs to be a 5-to-1 ratio for £10,000. Or you go £30,000, it'll be 100-to-1. Or for £100,000, you have the value of the people inside the car is effectively limitless. Like David Attenborough could be taking the last penguin, 2 penguins in existence to somewhere, and it would happily run them over just to save you a little bit of time. You don't even have to be in danger, just if there is. And that, presumably, obviously, is there, outside of death and imminent death, is there then a separate question about, well, actually, do we create a two-tiered and multi-tiered society, because some people can just pay to have more effective, more efficient AIs working for them that others can't?
Yeah. I mean, we kind of have that already in many ways. We already trade off, the fact that we have cars at all shows that we're willing to trade off some years of life for some people in order to save a few minutes on commuting and that kind of thing. We make these trade-offs all the time, and of course, people who are wealthier can afford to buy more safety things for their cars and fancier cars, or apply that to any realm.
Just a Rolls Royce where you're 15 feet from the front of it, so if anything does hit it, you're put
right. Exactly. So I think this does exist already. This isn't a new problem that AI introduces, but I do think that AI systems tend to concentrate these kinds of problems. They have a power law approach where they're just entrenching and amplifying the current systems, and especially when it comes to the economy as a whole. We currently our economy functions based on the fact that we can have competition and multiple firms doing things, and they can trade, and they have to compete with each other and all of that sort of thing. When you have a world where only very well-resourced companies can build these systems, and these systems are gradually swallowing up more and more of the economic pie, we are in a world where there's just a huge number of people who are living at subsistence level, and then a very small number of people who are doing very, very well for themselves. And so I think that kind of distribution of benefits is something that I'm very interested in, and something that OpenAI thinks a lot about. How do we manage that? So OpenAI is this capped profit structure. It's a weird new structure where the investors can only reach a certain limit, and then anything after that has to be distributed in some way to the people. Haven't figured out exactly what that means yet, but there's the idea behind it is to try and avoid the situation where you get very entrenched disparities. But it's very
but within that, there's that monopolies element. Like it's certainly within my industry, consolidation over the last 10 years has been fairly substantial. I've been a victim of it in that the company I'm part of has been bought by another one, which in the last 5 years, basically through acquisitions, has gone from sort of 20th in the market to 4th, verging on 3rd, just by buying up competitors.
Yeah.
Because it has a lot of capital behind it. And a lot of companies in the market have either fallen out of the market or have massively reduced in size because they can't keep up with the tech, because actually they're in an arms race. And so presumably at some point we'll get to either a small number of competitors or one. That seems unlikely. A small number who can kind of walk in lockstep to a certain extent. And obviously when it comes down to things like Google, okay, you can go elsewhere for video sharing sites and for web search, but they have an enormous piece of the pie.
Yeah.
Same with Facebook, same with the rest.
Yeah.
And there's not, like, short of breaking them up, there's not really a way to combat that.
I think there are some ways. So there's using something like Uber or ride sharing apps as an example. The problem arises when you have these systems where there are network effects. So like the system works better the more people that are on it. So Facebook's useless if it's only you on it. And so what you want is a system that allows the network effects to not cause lock-in. So someone proposed the idea that rather than having like these separate apps like Uber, Lyft, whatever else, you have a standardized protocol that can put out like, hey, this person needs a ride, and then all of the companies can like receive that, and whoever like can compete with the best price or the fastest time then wins that ride. So I think there are ways that you can try and design. It's basically like public goods for the tech industry. You need these kind of like standardized protocols that allow multiple organizations to compete while also letting companies like make use, like be able to make use of network effects as well. It's kind of confusing, but if that makes sense.
So I know you wanted to do some demos, so this is going to make it the last question for now, because I think it really relates to the topic. Obviously, your job is related to making sure AI doesn't get out of hand, but assuming it does, what are our recourses? Can we implement laws to give us access to control it? Do we have data police, as someone has suggested? How do we deal with AI if it goes rogue?
I think that really depends on in what way it goes rogue. Like there is a version of this where as soon as it goes rogue, there's no hope for us. We're just screwed. So we really don't want it to get to that point. There's a great researcher called Gillian Hadfield who's been thinking about essentially this question, like how can we get AIs to participate in the economy and be bound by regulations and laws? Like how can we make that appealing to them? And she has done some work around like, these AI systems can only provide services to someone if they have some sort of certification, so they're incentivized to like get this certification. It's kind of complicated, but yes, I think this is an avenue worth looking into. Obviously, it's a bit weird because like humans don't want to go to jail, which is a great incentive for us to follow the rules. But AI, what does that even mean? Like, how do you incentivize it to actually care about taking part in this system? But to get to the point, like, what can we do if it's going to go rogue? I think there are like 3 main ways that this could go very, very badly for us down the line. So, people have different probabilities on like how likely these things are, and you might think that none of these are very likely, but like these are the ways that in my mind I think it could possibly like be really bad for us in the long term. One is this misaligned AI thing. So the AI takes very literally what we tell it to do. It doesn't understand our background assumptions. An example that is often used here is what's called the paperclip maximizer. I don't know if people have come across this. So it's a thought experiment where it's like you build a system, an AI system, and you give it the task of, you're a paperclip manufacturer, and you give it to maximizing paperclips, and it decides to do that by turning every atom in the entire universe into paperclips.
I thought this was going to be like the Russian pin factory.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes, yeah, I've heard that one too. No, this is like literally it turns every literal thing in the universe.
No, that's much worse.
Yeah, we're not a good outcome. And this is kind of the argument here relies on two things. One is called the orthogonality thesis, which is the idea that you can be really, really smart, and that's independent of being really, really like morally good or like having the same values. Like some people think like, oh well, something couldn't be that intelligent without also understanding morals, but I don't know. I think those two things could be separate. I don't think
machine learning definitely can.
Yeah, we can't guarantee that we'll get both of them together. Yeah. And then the other thing it relies on is what's called instrumental convergence, which is the idea that there are certain goals, like not being turned off and like gathering resources, which are going to be instrumentally beneficial to any goal that you might give it. So anything you get, anything you say to a system to do, it's incentivized to stop itself getting turned off, because otherwise it couldn't complete the task, and it's incentivized to gather as many resources as possible so it can do a good job of completing that task. And if you put those two things together, you end up in this like world where you risk having misaligned AI. So that's one way. Another way I think it could go bad is slightly more easy to conceptualize. Basically, AI in the hands of an adversary. So that's sort of thinking of it as a technology equivalent to like nuclear bombs. You just wouldn't want someone having access to that if you thought they might use it in a bad way. So we want to be careful of that, and that's where something like laws or global cooperation and memorandum, what they call moratorium, things like that might be useful. And then the third way it could go very bad is we just gradually seed AI systems more and more power, more and more decision making, and we get to a world a bit like is it WALL-E, that film where all the humans are just like eating food? Oh. Yeah, like we're just all, Stuart Russell calls this like enfeeblement, like we're all just like enfeebled, that AI takes care of everything. And there might be a version of that which is like not too bad if it makes us all happy and comfortable, but there's also a world in which we're just like second-class citizens with no resources, and the AI systems run everything. So I think they're the three ways that like in the future it could go very long, and we want to try and think now how we can avoid those outcomes.
Well, that's all been utterly fascinating. But I must admit, this is the bit I've been looking forward to doing again. We got a little bit of a play beforehand on looking at the artificial intelligence systems. So, Rosie, do you want to show us some of the things you work with?
Yeah, so this is called Playground, and it's a way you can interact with GPT-3, which is one of our language models. And anyone can sign up for this now, so feel free to go ahead and do that. So we have a bunch of presets here that you can choose from. I chose this one, which is writing a 2-sentence horror story. So the way that often it works best with these systems is if you give it an example of the kind of thing you want, and then you ask it to do something. So we've given it the topic of breakfast, and it wrote a 2-sentence horror story there. Now wind, let's see what it comes up with. Oops. Okay. Yeah, so there we go. Now it's written a horror story about the wind, and you can change this to obviously any topic. I don't know if people do you want another. You want to nominate a topic?
Cats.
Cats.
A horror story about cats.
Yeah.
And then I think I put. So you want to try and like mimic the format so it knows what to do. Oh God, that's creepy. Yeah, and it can do things like summarizing text. So you can give it a complex piece of information, and then ask it to summarize it, and it will write something that's like a much more easy.
I feel like this is, as you've got their summaries for second grader, this is people not doing their homework in the future.
I mean, you say that, but this is also one of people often try and use this to build like essay writing tools and academic tools, and it's very hard for us because we have to judge like, okay, is this something that's going to assist a student but is still within the realms of being okay, or is this something that's just going to basically do someone's homework? And obviously we wouldn't really want to be supporting that, so it's tricky to tell the difference. It can also do things like coding, so you can ask for you can say something in like natural language, and then it will write Python or whatever else to do that thing for you. And there's a product called Copilot, which you can add into VS Code if you use that and you're a coder, and it will basically write code for you. So it's pretty great.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so this is GPT-3. You're welcome to sign up, have a play around. You can add your own things in. It's a lot of fun. I won't go into all the details, but there are all these settings on the right here that you can adjust to get it to do different things. But I think what a lot of people probably enjoy seeing is DALL-E, which is this system that we released recently. It's still on waitlist, so you're welcome to sign up for the waitlist, but you probably won't get access immediately. But essentially, you just give it a sentence and it will draw pictures. You will generate pictures based on what you give it. So we had a bit of a play around with this earlier, but happy to try any more prompts if people have something they want me to try out.
I think you should try to get it to generate a thumbnail for this video.
Ooh.
Yes.
Wait, I don't know, as in this very video?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
A YouTube thumbnail for a conversation about AI safety. Should we try that?
Yeah, let's see what happens.
I bet this will not do a good job, but
I think it's weird. I think the thumbnail is going to throw it a weird curveball.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. It will just be full of thumbnails. We'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, not
Yeah, too many words.
It doesn't do good with text at the moment, but
But it's interesting. It's interesting that it knows what a YouTube thumbnail is.
Yes, yeah, it's kind
Because
of got
it
this
put
whole
text in
style.
there.
Yeah,
Whereas if you just said an image advertising, like an image for a talk about
right.
AI safety, it wouldn't have put the text in there.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So we had a couple earlier. So I think I went for something along the lines of a heroic ginger cat fighting a monster or something like that.
Let's try that.
Yes.
There we go.
That's awesome. That's so cool. And one of the things which I was quite impressed with when you were showing us earlier is Sam was asking it to generate things related to his favourite football team, and it was showing pictures of people. And what got me is that you were saying that these are not real people; these are people that's generated. But look at it. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a website called This Person Does Not Exist. I don't know if you've seen that, which has existed for a while actually, and that also generates incredibly photorealistic versions of people that sometimes, people who are trying to create catfishing accounts will use those photos to try and look like people, and you can't reverse image search them because they're generated, so you can't immediately tell them. Yep, there you go. So that has existed for a while, but I think DALL-E that was very optimized for generating a certain portrait style of photo. I think the cool thing about DALL-E is that was it just kind of happened because it was trained on all of this different stuff, and so it's one of many things it can do. But yeah, it's kind of creepy.
Can you do a cat, a black and white cat dressed as Marie Antoinette?
Yeah.
This is because I believe that one of my cats, that he was Marie Antoinette in another life. He has a beautiful cat.
Let's try that.
I feel like Marie Antoinette might be a bit too. My gut feeling is it might be a bit too obscure. Whereas
Maybe.
French aristocracy. No.
We've got one from the chat, which I quite like, is Ronald McDonald performs open heart surgery.
Sure thing. Give it a go. I bet this might. Okay, so we have some safety features embedded into this to stop people generating dodgy stuff, and I wonder whether the term open heart surgery might trigger it. We'll see.
What happens in that case? There's just a big nah, or Or is it that it just won't generate properly?
It will say something like this violates our content policy or something. It's very oh god.
Oh, goodness.
Oh,
Oh, wow.
Not quite sure what.
I'm not even sure what that one is.
This one's kind of
Wow.
horrible.
that one
Oh.
kind of fits them.
And the last one, he
More or
seems to be
less.
doing it on himself. That's insane. Oh, wow. So,
Yeah.
questions about this. Can you tell us, I mean, basically how it works? How does it go about taking what you say and generating one of these images?
Yes. So I'm going to probably give a very oversimplified and possibly inaccurate explanation of this. So don't take what I'm about to say as like like truth. But this is my understanding of how it works. So firstly, there's a concept called word vectors. Have you heard of those before? Some of you have. Just to briefly explain, you can train models to essentially extract a mathematical vector that corresponds to different words. And so words that are similar or used in a similar context, like dog and bark, will have vectors that are like close together in 3D word space or whatever, or more D word space. And you can do maths on these vectors. So the vector for king minus man plus woman equals the vector for queen, which is kind of mind-blowing. I think like it's just so strange that we've like managed to create these like semantically valid like mathematical representations of words. And so we perform this on the words in the prompt. We kind of try and extract a mathematical version of that thing, and then the image part of it I think works by a process called denoising. So you essentially start with a very noisy image, you know, like when you turn on the TV and it would have static and it would be all blurry. You get something like that, and then you try and minimize the loss function until you like denoise that image until it becomes close to the thing that you asked for. Probably not explained that very well, but like it's this kind of iterative process of like going from something that's very like random pixels all over the place, and you're trying to like get it to like get as close as possible to something that would score highly given the word vector prompt that you gave it.
So is it a bit like, so you've got, so in order to do this, you've got essentially, you know, you've got this input term. It can go out and essentially with the internet go, okay, what does Ronald McDonald mean? What does open heart surgery mean? What does performing mean? Or performing open heart surgery? And it gets a sort of an idea, and then it just generates essentially a random image pixel by pixel, and just goes, how close is that to the two things that were described? Naff. Okay, I'm going to change a bunch of pixels, see if that's better. If it is better, that then becomes like the next improvement. It just keeps iterating, you know, or otherwise go back and just keeps improving until it ends up with something that's fairly good.
So it's not going out right now and like searching the internet for what Ronald McDonald is. It's already learned. When we trained it, it learned a conception of what Ronald McDonald was. So it's not like going up live and looking stuff up. It's already kind of got that embedded in it.
And it was trained on both text and image data, right? Like it's not learning what pixels are for the first time.
Well, surely there's two different layers.
Yeah, exactly. Like, well, because my impression of where this, when I've seen papers that were on this from like sort of 3 or 4 years ago, the training data involved both. Like it involved like it has to have a certain amount of access to. Okay, we know that the term king would correspond to this. These are all of the pixels that might represent kinginess, and we can extract feature like image vectors as well as text vectors, and then it's about kind of putting those two things together.
Yeah, so I think it works. It was trained based on like labeled images, and this is why things like if you put it like 35mm macro, because it took images from like Flickr where people like write captions, it learns that correspondence between the two, so you can trick it into doing like photographic effects. So yeah, I don't want to. I'm like going to get the details of this wrong, and definitely you should read the blog post in the paper if you're interested in it. But you can, my understanding is that it was this combination of like labeled images. That those things.
And what was the, like, do you know what the training data was? Was it just like the internet? Was it?
I think it was like a filtered version of the internet.
Well,
Otherwise, it would be so wrong.
so wrong. It's very wrong. Because like that's my impression about like kind of the big power that we can unlock in terms of AI these days is that there's just a huge amount of data, and so we can like things like the concept of Ronald McDonald, that like we can extract that from this model because it has learned so much. There's so much data.
Yes, and the interesting thing is also now people are creating these images and uploading them to the internet. So these will now become training data for future versions of these systems, which is, you know, kind of interesting and like could introduce some biases because it's obviously not perfect yet. And so it's
that's interesting. Yeah.
So what are the safety concerns here?
The safety concerns.
Yeah, what are they? What are you doing about them?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different things. So there's some more prosaic stuff. So like, you know, the kinds of issues we're seeing already with these systems. So for a while, if you asked it for like a photo of a CEO, it would give you a bunch of middle-aged white men in suits. You know, classic bias type issues. You know, that's trained on the internet. The internet is biased. That's what it creates. So we're working behind the scenes to try and like improve the representation there and have a bit more diversity. Then there's stuff like people who might use it to create like really graphic images, which is why I wasn't sure whether we might have the open heart surgery thing might be caught by it.
They made a cartoon, not a realistic photo.
That's a good point. Yeah, I wonder that may have been something that that they added in as a mitigation there. So sort of, yeah, people just creating like unsavory images that we don't really want to have as the main thing that DALL-E is used for. And then there's the slightly more, in my mind, like potentially very problematic things, which include like generating disinformation. So asking for a picture of Donald Trump meeting with like the leader of North Korea. I don't know what it might be. And so, like,
You did that.
Whatever you were going to say, probably already this.
Hunter Biden putting stuff on a laptop.
Yeah, it could be all sorts of things you can imagine. So creating disinformation is like another big thing that we are concerned with. It's I mean, this is partly why we released, well, like one of the key reasons we release these products is so that we can learn what people try to do with it, because if we try to red team our systems and guess what people might do, we're never going to be as creative as like the whole world. So that's something we like tracking is like, okay, what kind of things do people do try and do with this, and then how can we mitigate any risks or future versions of it.
So what sort of things have you done to sort of prevent misinformation? Is it just a case of removing the ability to produce it, or?
So there's usually like you can take a two-pronged approach to these things. One is technical solutions. So yeah, working behind the scenes to make it so that the model just can't produce certain things, or that it like has a embedded watermark in it that proves that it's fake, you know, whatever that might be, like a technical solution. And then you can have policy solutions. So this can be one of the first rules that we had for the early testers of DALL-E was that they weren't allowed to share photorealistic pictures of human faces. So you could generate them yourself and look at them, but we asked that people didn't share those publicly because we didn't think the world was ready for it yet, because as we saw, like they look like real people, and that might be very confusing. And if someone generates a photorealistic version of a celebrity, then that could mislead a lot of people. So you can have policy-based solutions, you can have technical solutions, and we try and kind of make use of both of those. And then overall, we want to try and like peel back the policy-based solutions and have as much as possible that's like built into the systems themselves. Cool.
As much as I would really like to talk about this like all night, this is absolutely fascinating. We have overrun slightly, so I'm going to end with a couple of little things. So first, which is a big question a couple of people have asked, is are people able to get their hands on this? Is this something people can access?
So DALI is still being kind of piloted with a small-ish group of people. You're very welcome to sign up for the waitlist, but you won't be able to get immediate access like you can with GPT-3. But just be patient. We're working hard on opening it up. So I'm sorry it's not quite available. There are other versions. So there is, I think, something called Midjourney. I haven't really played with it, and something called DALI 2, which is not related to DALI. DALI 2 has nothing to do with OpenAI. It's a completely separate effort. But that can give you a sense of how these things work. I don't think they're as good as DALI 2, obviously, but it gives you a sense.
Cool. And lastly, can you do us a picture of AI taking over the world?
Sure thing. Do you want it?
Wait. You said this would train the future AIs, so should we keep doing this?
Okay. In what style should we do it? AI taking over the world in the style of Van Gogh.
Yeah.
Let's put by Van Gogh. Great. I spell that right? Oh no, it's a G, is it? I feel like that's right.
Yeah, that looks good. That's good.
Okay.
It's very suspenseful.
Okay.
I feel safer somehow.
This one I can kind of see where it's going.
It's kind of like a robot, isn't it?
That's kind of, is that like Planet of the Apes?
Oh.
The kind of like style.
It's the flat Earth.
It is the flat Earth, isn't it?
The flat Earth. Oh no.
The truth is revealed.
Yeah, AI has revealed the truth. Okay, well, Rosie, thank you very much. That was absolutely fascinating. As I'm sure you can see, I could quite happily play with this all day. But we are going to have to wrap up now. So I want to say again, thank you very much to you. Thank you to all of the people who asked questions in the comments. It's great for you to come. Rosie, is there anything you want to say about yourself, or anything where they can find information, or any where you'd like to point people towards?
I don't really have anything to promote, but you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Rosie Campbell. I also have a website, rosiecampbell.xyz. Not much there, but you are welcome to have a look. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions. And I guess I would just say sign up for GPT-3 if you want to have a play.
Cool. And so next time we are going to be talking to Dr. John Lambie, who is one of my old professors from when I was at uni, who's going to be talking about how to be critically open-minded. That will be in a couple of weeks, which I think is the 2nd of August. I didn't bring it up. Yes, 2nd of August. And then after that one, I haven't got anything for this yet. After that one, we're going to be having Tom Kerse back on, who's going to be talking about all the exciting images that have been coming out of the James Webb Space Telescope recently. So that should be really exciting. And as I said, after that, we are going to be taking a bit of a break until the end of September due to people being away and having babies. So again, thank you very much to all coming. It was really interesting. And we're going to force Rosie to make us play with DALI a bit more once we get offline. So we'll say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.